All right, let's talk about something we see all the time but maybe don't really get. I'm talking about rust, specifically the hidden science behind why it pops up where it does.
You know exactly what I'm talking about, right? You've got this perfectly good piece of metal, and then boom, there's this one ugly patch of rust starting to form. Why there? Why just that one spot? And here's the really weird part. The metal right next to it, literally an inch away, is totally fine. It looks completely random, doesn't it? Well, I'm here to tell you it's not random at all.
So let's dive in and solve this little mystery, the puzzling patch of rust.
Okay, so the secret behind why one spot rusts and another stays perfect, it all comes down to science. There's this hidden electrochemical reaction happening, a tiny, invisible process going on right where you can't see it.
But before we get to the really cool part, we've got to cover the basics. Think of it as Corrosion 101.
Yeah, you can actually think of corrosion like a recipe. It needs 3 essential ingredients to get started. And if you're missing even one of them, rust just can't happen. Period.
So what are these magic ingredients? Well, first, you need something called an anode. That's the part that's actually going to rust and fall apart. Second, you need a cathode. That's the tough guy, the part that stays protected. And third, you need an electrolyte to connect them. And, an electrolyte is usually just something simple like water.
This is where it gets really interesting, this relationship between the anode and the cathode. They're like total opposites. The anode is the one that sacrifices itself. That's where you actually see the rust forming. But the cathode, it stays perfectly fine. It's the protected area. It's this strange little partnership.
Okay, so you're probably thinking, how can one single piece of metal have 2 different parts, an anode and a cathode? And that is the million-dollar question. It brings us to the star of today's show, the concentration cell effect.
So this is the fancy name for what's going on. All it means is that corrosion happens when the same piece of metal is exposed to different concentrations of this same solution. A perfect example is just water that has different amounts of oxygen in it from one spot to another. Here's the takeaway. That tiny little difference in concentration literally turns that piece of metal into a battery, a tiny, invisible, self-powered battery. And just like any battery, it's got a positive end and a negative end. One part corrodes, the other part doesn't. It's that simple. So the big question is, what creates these different concentrations in the first place? What's happening in the real world to create this tiny battery? And here's the most common culprit by far, oxygen, or a lack of it. Think about the area under a washer or deep inside a tight crevice. It can't get much air, right? It's starved for oxygen. And that low oxygen area becomes the anode. That's the part that rusts. Meanwhile, the area out in the open with plenty of air, that becomes the protected cathode. It's so counterintuitive, isn't it? The spot with less oxygen is the one that gets destroyed. Okay, so now that we get the science, let's go on a little scavenger hunt. Where does this corrosion actually hide in the real world? Where are these invisible batteries? Honestly, they're hiding everywhere once you know what to look for. Think about the tiny gaps and joints where 2 pieces of metal are bolted together, or under gaskets and seals, or even something as simple as a pile of wet leaves sitting on your shovel. Those leaves are blocking oxygen, creating that perfect spot for rust. A classic one is the water line on a steel post sticking out of the water. It's a perfect storm for a concentration cell. Now, this might all seem like a pretty small-scale issue, a bit of rust here and there. But understanding this is actually a really big deal. Because this hidden battery isn't just ruining your garden tools, it's a major, major cause of failure in some of our most critical infrastructure. I'm talking about things like pipelines running underground, where the amount of oxygen in the soil can change from one foot to the next. We're talking bridges, aircraft frames, huge marine vessels, even just your car. Basically, anything that has crevices or joints is at risk. And this quote just says it all, doesn't it? The real danger is not what you see, but the corrosion you don't. Because this kind of corrosion doesn't spread out evenly. It concentrates all its destructive power in one hidden spot, eating away at things from the inside out. Kind of makes you look at the world a little differently, right? Now that you know the secret, you'll start seeing these potential rust batteries everywhere. So take a look around. What invisible batteries are humming away right now all around you?